Bruce, as you said, a suspended councillor technically.
Yeah.
However, we wanted to ask you a few questions. We've discussed a few things with Councillor Best, and we've asked a lot of other councillors to come on board and give us some light
Sure.
on what's happened. What did you know about the financial situation? What were you presented over the last 3 years?
I think, no. In fairness, I said on public record on the council debate, in fairness to our fellow councillors, we were never told of the magnitude of the actual problem with the restricted funds and that sort of thing. But Blind Freddie could see that the figures were going west, and finances were raised many, many times, and unfortunately it fell on deaf ears. So whilst the restricted funds is a separate staffing issue, we were basically not told about that till the very end, or glossed over. It was brought up in the notice of motion. It was talked about the auditor's report. Did mention it. I think there was $4 million or something mentioned that was had been misplaced and that sort of thing. And I think Councillor Best raised that on the floor. But beyond that, nothing of the $200 odd million that we were finally presented with. But that's. I mean, we've got $565 million of it. I think $230 million in their round figures is the losses in the term of the council, and that's really what the councillors are responsible for. Yeah.
So they both the two councils collectively inherited a little over $300 million of debt.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the other $230 odd million was responsible in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I think that's that. Well, that's if you take it the fact that we were in surplus, a small surplus at the start, and our current position now, that is the current position. So,
but
the numbers don't lie. But the debt, the debt was carried over, but the debt we were handling and paying down initially at the start. That debt was being serviced, and
And as you said, with an operating surplus, you could easily cover that debt.
Yes, at the initial periods, from the reports I've seen, we were actually paying that debt down, and so if the council had been managed properly and council had focused on their true roles as Central Coast councillors, and not been party driven, as I've constantly complained about, if they'd stuck to their role as they were elected as Central Coast councillors and managed the council, then the $300 million debt would be, as it was at the start, serviced and being paid down, and that's long term. That debt was long term infrastructure debt, that sort of thing. It's something that was had to be done and was inherited. So
the administrator and the acting CEO has pointed to the fact that the situation as far as the cash flow was concerned was the straw that broke the back, that it was just basically going backwards quickly. Yeah. Was that your impression?
Well, if you look at the budgets each year, when Brian Glendenning was acting CEO, he forecasted a small surplus, and I think we only came in $5 million in debt in that period, and then the next one around, I think came in at it was over $100 million. So there was a marked difference in the way the place was being run, and that last financial year is where the real problems.
So it was really, the peak of this was really the last the last 1.5 financial years.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, if you look at Brian Glendenning's budget that he set and he delivered, I think it was a $5 million loss.
So we've seen a marked worsening in the last couple of years of the surplus or the lack of surplus.
Spiralling out of control.
Did you have a feeling that there were increasingly more and more staff being employed by the council to do a range of things? And
we didn't see that at council level. Bear in mind that the delegations and the restrictions on councillors is that we could only access the ELT, the directors, so everything that we spoke to. So as a councillor, you went to the council meeting, you could only speak directly to the directors. I wasn't allowed to speak to groundspeople. It was actually part of our code of conduct that councillors couldn't be involved in operational matters. So you didn't get to talk to the managers down the line. You didn't get to talk to the issues. But interesting, I did actually ask for an ombudsman report. I don't forget the date of it. It was in 2020, early on, and I actually asked for a report on the internal ombudsman's activities, and I wanted to know what was going on inside the council, inside the staffing. Was there any issues or any problems? And actually, I looked at the webcast the other night, and I think I said if I wanted to know if there's any skeletons in the room, and if we were running again, was there any baggage? And I mean, that was just looking back on now, that was just the understatement of understatements. And we never got that report. It was delayed and deferred, and the CEO never delivered it. And that, so I would, if we do come back, that's one thing I will be asking, to actually show us what the internal ombudsman internally has been working on, because they're the ones that deal with the staffing issues, that if there is misappropriations, if it's fraudulent, it goes to ICAC. If it's staff, management problems or systematic problems and that sort of thing, it would go to the internal ombudsman, and we never received that report.
Well, that must have been telling for you, or at least you must have thought something was awry.
Yeah, we were wondering why it was deferred and then deferred, and it never came out, and finally we were called into crisis, and a crisis meeting, and then told the real story. So.
The employment of the last CEO, Gary Murphy,
yes,
and his appointment and that employment process. How did you think that was handled?
I was critical of it at the time. Myself, Councillor Best, and that.
Why was that?
Well, basically, I think, and correct me, I could be wrong here, but I think the council spent around $50,000 in consultants to go out and do a national and international search for candidates. Now, we did get, I think, 5 or 6 shortlisted candidates that the selection panel, there was a panel of councillors, including the mayor at the time, that it shortlisted the councillors. And we only ever got to speak to Gary Murphy. Gary Murphy was the only candidate put up to the full council to vote on. And we raised this at the time, and we were told that he was head and shoulders above everyone else. But I was very vocal, because there was also the acting CEO, Brian Glendenning, who had a full knowledge of the workings of the council. He was a learned barrister, totally au fait with governance issues, and didn't have to take questions on notice, could answer questions, and I thought, for him not to get a run at the council or a full interview with the councillors was wrong. And I think in hindsight, if you look at the 2 budgets, I think it's a telling tale. And nothing against Gary Murphy. I think in a different circumstance and a different budget and a different financial situation, Gary may well have been the person to steady the waters and that sort of thing, but I think it really needed someone to wrestle it.
On that, there are some people who have contacted us who suggested that Gary was beholden to that process and to the people that chose him, and therefore didn't allow him to take independent decisions. Is there any validity in that? Well,
I don't see that. I mean, you're on $500,000 a year. You've got to step up and take your voice and that sort of thing through there. But there would be, from his point of view as a bureaucrat, I could understand him taking that decision. I mean, you probably saw the last CEO and what happened to him, and who opposed some of the processes and the politics. Stood up against the politics, and he may well be. He had a trial period, and I can understand him not wanting to. But that may not be the case. There may
Look,
be,
I know you're gentle as that, and
I mean, I've got to respect. I
Absolutely.
do respect the fact that he's a highly qualified bureaucrat with good credentials, and as I said before, on a personal level, got on well, and I think
Well, he had a few challenges as far as the budget's concerned. In his last interview with us, he mentioned his disappointment at the IPART decision on water and sewage charges, and that blew a very large hole in his budget.
Yes.
Is there any sympathy for that?
Well, I think it's a known thing. You know, in my business, if a sale falls over, I don't go and spend the commission. You know, I think in the real terms, if you lost the revenue, then you've got to actually trim the sales, and I don't think we were ever trod on as councillors. I don't think we ever had our foot put down and said, councillors, you've got to. Now, I like Brian Bell, who was the first CEO. Unfortunately, his health was an issue for Brian. But Brian would actually say, councillors, you know, don't be silly. He would actually pull us up, pull the councillors up. And 15 councillors is very dynamic, different parties, different agendas, different little things, and seriously, it needed wrestling.
Yeah. Well, particularly to do with the expectations perhaps the state government had on a newly amalgamated council with what we've found out now, a budget of only $5 million in real cash from Wyong to merge two of the larger organisations in the country together. Was that sufficient, do you think?
Oh no, I don't. I think if you look at the Northern Beaches Council that Dick Person actually took over as administrator, and what he set up under administration to what we actually got, I think that process could have been better. But it's a bit like having a car crash and the driver getting out and saying, well, the last person in the car didn't have the seat in the right position. You know, like from that point on, the councillors are responsible to drive the wheel, and I don't have any sympathy for that sort of talk. I think, in fairness, we were never actually told we only had $5 million. We were told we had $850 million turnover, and it was always about the turnover and how big it was and all that sort of thing. So I could easily see why people get carried away. But at the end of the day, I've said right from the word go, you can't defend the indefensible. The numbers don't lie. So. Yeah. I'll come back to that, particularly to do with the competence of perhaps a new council and staff. But I wanted to ask you, there was some allegations in political arenas, federal political arenas, that the councillors have been gagged as in asked not to talk to the media by the administrator. No. Is that the case? No, not at all.
Yeah. So you haven't received
not at all. Yeah.
Any advice or requests or stuff from the administrator to not speak to the media?
I've had one meeting with him, and I've had one meeting with the administrator. Very straight, very frank, very businesslike. Told me how it was, at no point we were gagged or anything like that. No, that's rubbish. I mean, I think a few people are lying low. I think there's a side of politics that don't really want to be questioned too hard on the antics that are going on.
Well, in that vein, why did two councillors resign, do you think? I mean, what was
I think that was their chance to really highlight the utter frustration and disgust with the financials. Troy Marquette was very strong on asking for costings and fundings, and he would put up when something was put up. Troy, I always said he didn't have any filter, any danger filter. Whatever the subject was, Troy would question it, and he questioned some of the grants and some of the grants funding, what it was, and he ended up with code of conduct complaints against it, because he questioned where the money was being put out and that sort of thing. And I think out of frustration, and I think the writing was on the wall. They knew, the councillors could obviously see that we were not going to be left standing next week, and as much as we would like to have them back in the arena if we do come in, I think that was their way of actually having some media attention to the problem, and good luck to them. That was their decision.
Well, if that's the case, at the current situation, is those councillors, or those now 13 councillors, because of the two resignations, will resume in April because of the legislative requirements.
Yeah.
How do you think that council that newly formed council will behave?
No difference, because we didn't have the numbers with Troy or Rebecca not there. We didn't have the numbers to bring resolve and to bring fiscal responsibility and all the things that we've been.
Surely there will be some learnings from that. Even the most strident advocates of the last council must admit that there was strife there?
You
Well,
you think there'll be contrition and apology?
Well, yes, I would. I would expect some.
There will be
given
from me, and
Yeah.
certainly from Councillor Best. And that I'm very disappointed and I'm very angered because I just think, from my perspective, that I entered this this whole arena without alignment to any parties or ran under my own name, and I think on first preference votes, if the mayor had been elected on first preference votes, I would have been the mayor because
Sure.
I got the most first preference votes. But I think, look, it's certainly from our point of view, or my point of view, and certainly Councillor Best and Councillor Pillen, I know that we're very disappointed with the outcome and where it's led, because it didn't have to be that way. It just did not have to be the way it went, and it was politics over everything else, and the impediment.
Well, was it a personality thing? I mean,
no, it was party driven.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, and I think I saw Greg Best made the same thing. The Liberals put it together, so therefore in opposition politics, Labor had to pull it apart. So right from day one, whatever was put up had to be pulled down. Opposition to the airport, opposition to the revitalisation of Gosford, opposition to the government-appointed Gosford architect, opposition to any major state rail things. You name it. Ettlong Channel. Now that's ground a ferry, put commuters in chaos, make them drive to Patonga. I mean, we were very lucky in that whole episode. People driving from Wagstaff trying to meet a ferry in Patonga, but you know those roads. We're lucky we didn't get a fatality. Not drownings on the bar. It was more like road fatalities and that sort of thing.
So it had descended into, in your view, a partisan battleground?
Yes, extremely. We might as well have been sitting in a state government. We might as well have been in Macquarie Street.
Well, there's a lot. So for an eventual new council, what are the qualities, do you think, first for councillors, that you would like to see in people, the candidates that come forward?
That's a good question, and I think, look, I underestimated the actual volume of work and commitment and that sort of thing than what it was. I thought I could just go and do a couple of meetings, and it was a monthly meeting when I put my hand up. I went to bi-monthly. It was supposed to be a 2-year term, and for the balance of the administration that was extended to the full term, and so suddenly what I thought I was getting into ended up being a lot bigger. But I think anyone that has aspirations to be a councillor, and I don't discourage anybody to put their hand up, but you really have to have some credentials on management, on governance, on common sense. It is a business. It's a $850 million colossus business. It's not a it's not a corner store, and you can't bring P&C committee meetings sort of mentality, and you can't bring your private political agendas that are and that's your only focus, and that's where we went wrong.
Is there a case for no parties
You get no argument from me. So.
Well, you're celebrated independent in that regard.
Yeah.
But if the partisanship of the council is so rife, is that something you'd like to see less of?
Oh, I think in the old days where the parties weren't allowed to run in Labor government, I think they had their candidates there, but they weren't allowed to run under Labor and Liberal, and that's where the problem lies. I mean, I sympathise with Dick Persons on a lot of levels. He was handed the plane when it was in full nosedive 100 feet from the ground, and he's had to pull the levers hard to stop it from crashing. And whereas we try to trim the altitude when we had speed and altitude, and trim it up and have a gentle glide down. The merger should have created savings, and he is right that there was no genuine attempt by the council, or there was no genuine attempt to support the merger at all. I mean, we actually put up a notice of motion that was called support of the amalgamation, and it was voted down, amended, and taken off into a poll.
Just onto other things, we've been contacted by several ex-staff members, some of them senior staff members, who point to the fact that it was a cultural problem inside council, that a lot of people were resigning and there was a good deal of staffing issues, and that the culture after amalgamation obviously is difficult between the two executives. Is there something to be said in your for those thoughts?
Look, I think if you go to any merger or amalgamation in any large organisation, it's a culture, and I understand in the private sector why they come in and they sack the whole thing and then they rehire, because it's too hard to change the culture. You're better off starting from scratch, and you can't do that in local government. And there would be resistance to change. But I don't think anyone has argued with me that the process of council has been efficient and runs well. I don't think
you get any argument from anybody.
I think this is the merger. It was a chance to make changes and to actually get some scale and efficiencies and bring in new ideas. Now you've got the e-lodgement now for plans and things like that. I mean, the system was a dinosaur, and then you had two of them on the coast, which I never supported. I wasn't pro-merger at the start. I realised it was going to be a problem, but from a regional point of view, I saw us just going backwards as a region. And you know, if you don't have to travel very far to see the Hunter, how well it's gone, and the South Coast, how well it's going. The Blue Mountains and that.
So competence inside council as a whole, obviously, is or the cultural competence is an issue. Do you believe?
Well, yes, you've got to manage that, and this is where I'm bitterly disappointed about the redundancies, because we argued that natural attrition should have been the case if the councillors had focused on what they were supposed to do and actually got in and supported the merger process. We would have actually put a freeze on new jobs. A couple of years ago, you lose 10% a year, and all of a sudden, over a few years, you're back down to the numbers that's substantial. No one lost their jobs, no sackings and that sort of thing. So this is what had to be trimmed early on in the plane. That's what I said about the plane where we had some altitude, and of course we didn't. And then all of a sudden, we're in a nosedive. Dick has to come in, sack everybody, pay people out. Now it's costing us money to pay redundancies.
We understand there are loans taken out in that regard.
Yes.
But to move on to the current situation, even after calling for administration and so on, as Mr. Best did, there must be some regret on the harshness of the austerity that the administrator and the acting CEO have suggested in and up to, well, frankly, up to 40% rate rise for some ratepayers. Yeah. That surely must concern you.
Oh, it is, and this is where I said initially it's been so disappointing, because it just didn't have to be that way. As I said before, if you trimmed up the staff numbers early in that notice of motion that we put up to support the amalgamation, we highlighted the date that the freeze on the administration had. They put on that you couldn't take
for the harmonisation of rates.
Well, not so much that there was a freeze on that you could not
change the rates.
No, change the staffing numbers.
Change the staffing. So,
but that there was a chance there to get in early on that and get the staffing numbers, because it really was the staffing numbers that blew the costs out. And
well, there was certainly identified at least 350 extra.
Yes.
Pre and post amalgamation. That's a staggering amount of money.
And considering the merger was supposed to actually
reduce, So that part of it, in your view, has been gone against the tide.
Well, think about it, David. When we merged, did we pick up an extra 10 beaches? Did we pick up more roads? Did we pick up more bins and that? We've still got exactly the same amount of infrastructure that we're servicing, and technically we should be able to service it from one administration.
Is there a case, though, that there's been cost shifting from the state government to local government over the years? The Local Government Association has said that's been happening for many years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Is there a case for councils having a restricted way of raising money in the first place?
Yeah, look, I think that is an issue. I think, we get rate rises anyway. I mean, the idea
they're pegged pretty. closely.
But yeah, they do. But there's always a rate. There is always a rate rise and that sort of thing. But I think once again, I'm getting back to the fact that were councils were they ever efficient, and was there a chance to actually make some changes to bring some efficiencies? And this is where the merger. This is the opportunity that they lost with their merger. So I think you've got those cost pressures coming in, so you've got to manage them. And you know, I don't disagree that the state government does push some of the costs down, and in fairness, the councillors have tried to push back, but you know, it's a little brother fighting the big brother, and we often come out second best.
We with our the Masthead and Novo News in Newcastle, we noticed that seems to be a much more collaborative approach between the council and the state government, despite them being on different sides of the political fence. And there's a lot going on in Newcastle. Why hasn't that been able to occur on the Central Coast?
Well, that's where I'm disappointed with the politics, because this is exactly what didn't have to happen. You know,
but that wasn't the parties per se. It was surely the people of
well,
science.
I think you've got to look at the politics on the Central Coast in general. You've got a division, divide and conquer. You've got the northern ALP seats, and then you've got the terrible seat through there. So there's this constant divide, and there seems to be this impediment of progress, because the last thing the ALP wants is to Tukely to vote like Terrigal. There is probably on a pure political analysis, there's probably not any political advantage or on a prosperous or united Central Coast for the ALP, because they actually benefit from the welfare vote. They benefit from our low socio-economics, and unfortunately with that comes all the high arrest rates, the domestic violence, the unemployment, the youth suicide, all that sort of thing comes from that economy. And this is where I was really frustrated that with the background of such poor socio-economics that we have, there wasn't a focus on our economy, there wasn't a focus on jobs. If anything, I mean, what council trashes its airport and sends jobs away in an area that's starving for employment? I mean, who does that?
And just to look into the future, hopefully a brighter future, Bruce McLachlan, will you be standing again as a councillor?
I haven't ruled it out, I haven't ruled it in. I'd like to see how this all plays out. I actually only nominated on the very last day of the election last time. I had a look at the ballot sheet or the form guide, and saw who was running and who wasn't, and I didn't see anyone running for the entrance that I felt would stand up. And so I'll probably do the same thing again. I'll probably have a look at it, and I don't have to rely on party selections and that sort of thing, so I'll keep an open mind of it. My wife said it's okay to run again, but she's the boss. If she says no to it, and it is a big commitment, I must admit, from your family and that sort of thing there. So, you know, for me, it's unfinished business. This is not the result that I had hoped to come in and bring into the thing. And I would really encourage, if I don't run, I would really encourage other business people or someone with some administrative background to put their hand up. I think if we have eco warriors and passionate single agenda councillors, that we're going to be in the same problem again. And once again, if we get a dominance of the parties, I think nothing will change, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for speaking with Central Coast newspapers and Coast Community News.
Yes, but as I said, I'm certainly not gagged, and I'm very surprised to hear that comment.